To welcome everybody to the policies and practices meeting for the conformity assessment section. We're doing a virtual format again this year, of course. Looks like we've got all of our speakers for the first session. And I'm going to hand things over to Scott Wentworth, our section chair, in just a minute for some opening comments, but I will put up the agenda briefly. I guess I'm hearing that it wasn't maybe well circulated or published in the sign up or the marketing material, so we apologize for that. But this is our plan for the afternoon. So we're starting off for the next couple hours with 3 different speakers from NIST, familiar, I think, to anyone who's participated in these meetings in the last few years. But before we get to that, I'll turn things over to Scott Wentworth. Scott Wentworth from Retless Laboratories is an ACIL board member. He's been chair of our section for 5 years now, I think, Scott. And I'll turn things over to you for some comments.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, it's been a while. I don't know if it's been 5 years or more, but it's been a while, and I've enjoyed chairing the section. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here this morning. Thank our first group of speakers, Ramona, Amy, and Warren, for being here and supporting us virtually for our P2 conference. We really appreciate it. I hope that everyone is doing well, staying healthy through these times. While virtual, we've had good success with last year, and I'm sure we'll have success this year. We do hope that by next year, we'll be able to get together face-to-face again. We'll see how that works out. Not sure how our overall P2 meeting format will come together next year as far as visits go and Hill visits and those things. But from a speaker standpoint, we certainly hope that we'll be back to our normal format. So appreciate that. I want to thank Dan and Bob, our ACL staff, for putting this together virtually. And thanks to Dan for agreeing to kind of be our MC here again today as we roll through the day. And I'm sure we'll have others joining in or jumping in and out depending on the topic and the speaker we have going. So looking forward to a good day of presentations, and I'm sure we'll be receiving a lot of good information like we always do. So thanks again, and Dan, I'll roll it back to you.
All right, thanks, Scott. We'll move to our first set of speakers. And as you can see from the agenda, we've got 3 folks from NIST. I believe, Ramona, you're going to be starting off. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I'm going to start.
All right. Well, welcome to all 3 of you. We've got, first up, we've got Romana Saar is the manager of the NIST Telecom MRA program. She oversees the day-to-day operations for the use of, for the designation of U.S. conformity assessment bodies to numerous mutual recognition agreement partner telecom regulators, so different countries, economies around the world. Ramona represents the United States at these key MRA meetings and is currently serving as the chair of the APEC Telecom MRA Conformity Assessment and the MRA Task Force. So welcome, Ramona.
Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me back to come and talk a little bit about telecom MRAs. It's great to be here and to see a few familiar faces. I don't see many people these days, so this is really nice. I've prepared a fairly detailed set of slides that we may not get through in the time that I've been allotted, which is fine. And if not, the material is there. And if you have questions about it, you can always ask me separately, or we can facilitate another conversation at some other time. So I'm going to start my little timer here. Let me just figure out how to see my own slides fully here. Today's conversation will be about our telecom MRAs, and I'm going to start with just an overview of who our telecom MRA partners are, and then just a brief slide on a couple key issues that are happening right now, and then a deeper dive into 3 topics. One is our new US-UK telecom MRA. One is with the EU and the imminent activation of a number of security essential requirements that are going to impact U.S. manufacturers, all manufacturers, and in particular also notified bodies in terms of conformity assessment. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the new market surveillance regulations in Europe, and then just go over some recent and upcoming meetings that are taking place. This first slide just identifies who our telecom MRA partners are. We have a number of bilateral MRAs. The one in red highlight there is our new UK MRA. Ignore the red highlight for Europe. They just don't know why that's red. We have our European Union, the EEA EFTA states, MRA, Japan, Israel, and Mexico as bilateral agreements. And then we have one single APEC-TEL MRA where we implement bilaterally with different economies. And I've listed here our phase 1 MRAs, which is just for the recognition of testing labs, and then our phase 2, which are Canada, Hong Kong, and Singapore. So what does our office do? Well, NIST serves as the designating authority for these telecom MRA partners. We have about 110 US CAB locations that are currently participating in the program, and we're managing about 600 different scopes of recognition. So that means a location is recognized for a specific economy for a specific set of standards. We have a link here that I've included on all of the designation requirements for all of our MRA partners. And also there's another link that you can click on to go to see all of the recognized CABs and their scopes. We spend about 80% of our time just managing this part of the program, which is designation and renewal of CABs. We also designate TCVs to the FCC, and there are 22 domestic TCVs currently that we've designated to the FCC. One note here, because we often talk about NIST being the designating authority, for the US labs and the FCC recognition, it's the US accreditation bodies that are serving as the designating authority to the FCC for domestic labs. So we often don't mention that in our presentations, but they also are serving as a designating authority. So a couple key things that are happening right now, I've included them all on one slide. These will impact conformity assessment bodies in the US and in particular testing labs. Recently, Korea announced that they are converting a number of their EMC standards, the KN standards, to national standards under the CAS-C and CAS-B system. And there's a May 9th deadline, meaning that test reports issued as of May 9th have to include the new references. The big challenge here is we're going from freely available standards to standards that have to be purchased. And we're getting some reports from our US labs that the process of ordering these standards is laborious. It's challenging because if you don't have a Korean presence, it's challenging. So we're gonna have to see how that process takes place over the next couple months, but it looks like a really big endeavor on the part of the labs. They also have to have their scopes of accreditations updated. So, oops, I don't know how to get back here. This is going more quickly than I have to, there you go. So that's a big one. With Canada, we have a phase 1 and a phase 2. They have a detailed technical checklist for the lab assessments. They have been in the process of revising that assessment checklist and also some of their procedures for the MRAs. And we did put together some US comments. We got very good input from the technical assessors that do a lot of the assessments for the laboratories. And we were able to submit some comments to Canada. We hope they will consider those comments in revising their technical checklist to make it more clear and to make it a more successful process when the assessors are assessing the labs, so we're not going back and forth with correcting checklists and so forth. For Hong Kong, we have phase 1 and phase 2. The news here is that more recently, Hong Kong has added what they call their type acceptance criteria to the MRA. These are technical areas where there's no formal AFCA standard yet, and they might be referencing international standards, and they've developed a document that identifies the basic performance criteria and the international standards. So that's been added. We don't have any certification bodies that have added it yet to their recognition, but we anticipate that they will do so in the near future. Then there are 2 economies that have expressed interest in moving to a phase 2. One is Israel, and the other is Chinese Taipei. The way this works with moving to a phase 2 is that in all cases, USTR has to be on board with being able to dedicate the resources to do this. Also, the FCC needs to be on board, and there has to be some demonstrated interest by U.S. stakeholders. So we'll be reaching out to some of our labs that are recognized under phase 1 for both of these to find out interest in phase 2, and also reaching out to our certification bodies to see if they have an interest. The challenge with phase 2 is understanding the scheme requirements. It usually takes a while for us to come up to speed with understanding what those economies require. So expect some news about that in the near future. And then finally, for Indonesia, we don't have an MRA with Indonesia, but we keep in close contact with them through the APEC-TEL Conformity Assessment and Telecom MRA group. And they have this list for laboratories that can be used for testing for Indonesia, foreign labs. And a lot of the labs have had challenges getting on this list. Apparently, it's only issued once every 6 months. So we've been providing some assistance and guidance to US labs on this process. All right, moving on then to our MRA with the UK. I think I've reported on this before, but we signed the text of this agreement in February of 2019. It mirrors the US-EU MRA in many respects. It covers a telecommunications equipment sectoral annex and then an EMC sectoral annex. The main difference is that it refers now to the UK regulations for EMC and radio instead of the EU directives. The MRA entered into force on January 1 after quite a bit of work to get it to that place. And I wanted to mention 2 things in regards to that. The first is that the way this MRA works is that the UK test labs and the UK TCBs that were recognized by the FCC under the US-EU MRA, they continue to be recognized. They did have to be redesignated directly by BEIS in the UK instead of going through the commission. And that process worked fairly well. And I believe that all of the test labs and all of the TCBs in the UK were able to successfully transition to keep their FCC recognition now under the US-UK MRA. The situation for our US CABs was a bit different. Firstly, we only made the recognition available to US CABs who were already notified bodies for the EMC directive and the radio equipment directive. And we did have a transition process where we had to redesignate them. They had to get their scopes updated to reference the new UK regulations. And the UK recognized them as a new type of body called a UK approved body. I'm going to show you a little bit about the transition. The key thing here is the UK's scheme is not well developed yet. So we have, I believe it's 15 approved bodies for the radio equipment regulations and 13 for the EMC regulations, but the scheme is still developing, so it's a bit of a challenge. If you're interested in knowing who the approved bodies are, you can go to a new database that the UK has created. It's called UKMCAB, UK Market Conformity Assessment Bodies. There's a link down below where you can go directly to this to find out all of the different approved bodies that are included. But here I've done the one for the radio equipment for the US under approved body, and there you can see we have 15. The next few slides highlight some of the differences between the EU scheme and the UK scheme. I'm not going to necessarily go into too much detail here, but this information is available to you. If you're interested, the EU had the NANDO database, and now we have the UKMCAB database. So they're trying to mirror as many of the the framework of the scheme as best they can. The CAB deliverable for the notified bodies in the EU is the EU type examination certificate that is converted now to a UK type examination certificate. For the marking on the products, the CE mark, of course, is used in Europe, and it will continue to be used in Northern Ireland. And there is a new UK conformity assessed mark for the UK, and there's a session later today with Mike Violette who's going to talk more about that. For radio equipment and also equipment that falls under the EMC regulations, you can still use the CE marking for the rest of this year. So the transition for radio equipment and devices under the EMC regulations, likely we're not going to see a huge amount of activity here until the end of the year. Under the EU system of harmonized standards, this is where if you use a harmonized standard where the references are published in the official journal, you can enjoy the presumption of conformity. That is still, of course, the concept that's going to be used in the EU and also in Northern Ireland. The UK has decided to term these types of standards designated standards instead of harmonized. So we're getting used to some new terminology there. I did include a couple links here to designated standards. There's specific ones that are going to be under the radio regulations and the EMC regulations, and then also for the low voltage. But if you go to those links, you'll see it's a slightly expanded list from what you might have seen in the EU. Now, specific to radio equipment regulations, the reference in the EU was to the directive. The new reference is to the UK radio equipment regulations, which originally were just the direct transposition of the radio equipment directive in the UK. But one of the confusing things about this particular transposition is they renumbered everything and they've called things slightly differently. So there's a real effort on the part of the approved bodies to make sure they're referencing the correct sections when they're issuing their conformity assessment products. There is a Schedule 29, which identifies all of the changes that apply once Brexit occurred, and those things also need to be paid attention to in terms of what the changes are for the approved bodies. And just to give you an example, the Module B reference, which has to do with issuance of the EU type examination certificate, that's now a Schedule 3. So small things like that, but important reference changes that all the approved bodies need to pay attention to. And then for those of you familiar with the notified body system, the Commission issues a guidance on different articles when they get implemented. And I've just given one example here where they had guidance on what kind of information you need to put on the product if you have restrictions on placing it in service, and the UK has something equivalent now. So they're trying to mirror as best they can the information. For the CAB coordination group, many of you might be familiar with the Radio Equipment Directive Compliance Association, which is serving as the coordination group for the notified bodies in the EU. They have an association, which includes also manufacturers. They have a reflector that enables them to have technical discussions. They develop technical guidance notes, etc. There's no such equivalent group that is formally endorsed in the UK yet. So Nick Hooper, if any of you know him, is trying to come up with an informal group right now. They've established a little website, but it's not yet fully sanctioned by BEIS yet. So there's efforts sort of from the ground up to try and reestablish in the UK the same kinds of things that we're seeing in the EU, just because that kind of a body is going to be really important in terms of guidance that's provided to the approved bodies. Oh, so sorry, let me go back one. So I have the same information available for the EMC regulations. I just didn't think it was necessary to, I think this was just to illustrate the point that there are things that are different and things that have not yet been fully established yet for the UK. And we're working with them on that. Okay, transitioning now to the next topic. This next section has to do with the Radio Equipment Directive. And I wanted to mention two things that are happening right now that I think are really important for conformity assessment bodies in the US, certainly manufacturers as well, and just to see sort of the trend of what's happening in Europe in regards to the Radio Equipment Directive. Okay, so just a brief reminder for everyone, for the Radio Equipment Directive in Europe, there are a number of essential requirements in the directive, but there's only a subset that have currently been activated. So the key essential requirements that are activated for all radio products that fall under the directive are the ones for safety, health, EMC, and effective and efficient use of the spectrum. Those three apply to all products. Then there is the Section 3.3, which is set up with a number of essential requirements, most of which have not been activated. And for those, the Commission can say, you know, this subset of radio products are going to need to meet this requirement when it gets activated. And so the Commission process is to think about which ones need to be activated and then which subset of products need to be covered under it. Right now already, the 3.3G, which is access to emergency services, that one is activated because there are some remnants from the RNTTE directive that are included. So the key thing for notified bodies under their conformity assessment scheme is that we have 17 radio equipment directive notified bodies in the US, and the requirement is you have to be able to do all of this or you can't do any of it. When the radio equipment directive came into being, the challenge for many of our notified bodies who had been working in EMC and radio was branching into this safety and health area. So that was a new area for them where they may have to review technical documentation related to a product for safety and health. I'll say one other thing about this particular directive, and that is that the only time you are mandated to use a notified body is under 3.2 and 3.3 if you don't use an existing harmonized standard in full or if there's no harmonized standard. So for 3A, 3.1A and B, you don't have to use a notified body even if you don't use a harmonized standard. Where this comes into play now is in 3.3G. So a lot of my conversation now is going to be about 3.3G and then some other articles under 3.3, where if there's no harmonized standard, you have to use a notified body because this impacts all of our notified bodies. And remember, just keep in mind that all or nothing principle. So the first one that I wanted to introduce was the one in regards to 3.3G. There's something new happening there. There was a delegated act that was published in 2019 that called for a requirement that any mobile phones, smartphones, placed on the market as of March 17th, 2020, have to be able to access Wi-Fi and GNSS location information for emergency communications. And essentially this is to help pinpoint exactly where a person is with the phone. And also have access to the Galileo program information. What does this mean for our notified bodies? Well, if this is coming up on March 17th, for products placed then, the notified bodies are going to start seeing products that are going to start going through that conformity assessment now. When the commission gave ETSI the standards mandate to develop standards for this so that there would be harmonized standards, ETSI declined. ETSI said we're not going to develop standards in this area. The full reason for why they decided not to do that is not clear, but my understanding is that essentially their view is there are already other standards that exist for this kind of thing, and we don't want to have to now create a whole new set of standards. There's a similar regulation, for example, for vehicles already under this thing called e-call. So essentially the main point here is there are not going to be any harmonized standards available for this come March 17th because ETSI has said they're not going to do it. So for our conformity assessment bodies, what this really means is all of our notified bodies will need to understand, what the product of such testing is. What does it look like? What is the manufacturer going to need to do for their risk assessment? How am I going to be able to tell if the product now complies with the requirement for making sure that it is able to access this information? Right now, the Radio Equipment Directive Compliance Association is trying to coordinate some basic level of understanding with the notified bodies so that the proper guidance is in place as soon as possible. So just stay tuned for this because more guidance will come out, but this is an interesting scenario where there will not be any harmonized standards. So the notified bodies will be getting requests to render a decision and issuance of an EU type examination certificate for this specific element very soon. Okay, so the next part of this EU presentation has to do with cybersecurity. And the first part of this is just explaining that the Radio Equipment Directive turns out to have a really big role in the overarching EU cybersecurity ecosystem. And there was a recent conference that took place with the European Organization for Cybersecurity, and it was made very clear that there's the Cybersecurity Act, which covers potentially the development of cybersecurity certification programs and potentially mandating of them. And this is the small CSA schemes document here. And then there's the Radio Equipment Directive, which covers some elements of cybersecurity in 3.3, which I'm going to cover in a moment. And then there's the concept of all of the harmonized standards that would be in existence to help manufacturers come up with compliance related solutions for cybersecurity. And then there's all these other things going on. So there's e-privacy, there's the general data protection directive. There's all kinds of other things going on, but there's also going to be the development of a new horizontal legislation that's going to fill the gaps. So we are paying close attention to this, but keep in mind our interest is in the radio equipment directive aspect of this. I don't know a lot about cybersecurity, and I don't know a lot about the European system, except for what I've learned recently, but just keeping in mind that the radio equipment directive is part of this entire ecosystem, and we will be staying tuned to see how this all develops. And also just the point that we do expect this new horizontal legislation to try to coordinate, make some sense of all the different regulations in Europe right now in cybersecurity. So let's take a look specifically at the three essential requirements for cybersecurity that are imminent, and they're already very far in development. So there's three of them. The first is a 33D, which talks about radio equipment not harming the network or its functioning. Let me just move this for a moment here. I see all kinds of things on my screen. Or its functioning nor misuse of network resources, thereby causing an unacceptable degradation of service. So I just termed this one D, no harm to the network. The next one is that personal data and privacy of the user and the subscriber are protected. And the last one is that radio equipment supports certain features to ensure protection from fraud. And here they're really talking about monetary financial fraud. So these are the three essential requirements that are imminently going to be activated. Okay, and they're going to be activated through what's called a delegated act. So a delegated act does a few things, and there's a few things that it doesn't do. So when they issue the delegated act, it activates the essential requirements, right? So that's coming up, and there's already a draft in circulation. It will explain the rationale for why they are going to activate those three essential requirements, and it's going to delineate the subset of products that are covered by those new essential requirements. So if you recall earlier, I mentioned that the ones on safety, health, EMC, and radio, efficient and effective use of the spectrum, those cover all products. These other 3.3 elements cover a subset. So this delegated act will explain, this is the subset of products that will have to comply with this new essential requirement. And then it will also delineate what's not covered. I've already seen a copy of the draft delegated act, and for example, things that are not covered are vehicles because they have their own requirements, medical devices, for example, because they have their own requirements. So happy to share that draft delegated act with anybody if they're interested. It's a public document. What the delegated act does not do, it doesn't include any detail about what the actual requirements are going to be. That is still yet to come. Those requirements will be developed by the European standards organizations once the Commission provides a standards mandate. There is actually a lot of work behind the scenes that has already taken place by the radio expert group in Europe. They've already looked at all the existing standards. They've been mapping them. They've been trying to figure out which ones might cover some of these aspects of these new essential requirements. So the solutions, they might be sought through existing security standards where they exist, or there might be a need to develop some new standards. One thing is clear, though, about what can be done here is that this has to be able to be reviewed by notified bodies. And so the view is that whatever they decide to do with these three delegated acts, with these three essential requirements, there have to be objective tests where the results of those can be clear and where the results of those can be clearly reviewed by notified bodies. So pass-fail type of things, objective testing. Subjective testing, which is a lot of what cybersecurity testing is, those are going to have to be found in the other areas of solution. So what I mentioned before, if it's not objective testing that can be covered under the RED, it'll have to be covered under these other things like the cybersecurity schemes, certification schemes that might have to be developed, or other solutions. So that's in progress now. It looks like the standards mandate and everything will take a couple of years. So we're looking that this will be implemented quite a few years from now, but it's happening now, and it's been in the works for a while. So what does this mean for our notified bodies and also our accreditation bodies that assess the notified bodies? Well, To date, our notified bodies have been covering documentation reviews and issuance of EU-type examination certificates for safety, EMC, and radio, the activated center requirements. So now they're going to need to think about how are they expanding their expertise to include the ability to review security-related conformity assessment results, whatever those may be, because we don't really know what they look like yet. So the notified bodies need to expand that competency. They can do that through two different ways. They can expand their existing personnel competency, or they can hire security experts. I've put out a couple surveys to the notified bodies just to see kind of where folks are thinking they might go. It's still a little bit early for people to be thinking as seriously about it as maybe they need to yet right now. And there's a mixed bag of responses. There's a mixed bag of responses on that. So they have the option of doing both. But the key is notified bodies are also assessed to 17065. So the accreditation bodies will have to also make sure that the assessors who are doing the assessment are able to properly assess the notified bodies to make sure they have the competency. So this is something new. We're seeing this kind of creep into other areas as well. We have a couple other telecom MRA partners who have added security-related standards in the MRA. So this is something that is relatively new for EMC and radio labs, but it looks like because these are covered under the same devices they're testing and certifying, it is creeping in. Final topic, well, one of the last topics I'm going to cover is just the new EU market surveillance regulations that come into effect in July of this year. I've included a link there to the new regulations that were put out in 2019. These do come into force fully in July of this year. I have a separate, really more detailed presentation that I can make available. I think I've provided it to Bob before, but it can be circulated again. I didn't want to cover all of those details here because we don't have time, but that is available. Here I've just listed a summary of some of the changes that are occurring, and I'll briefly review those with you now. And then if you have any questions, you can let me know. So the biggest change is that come July, all of the products placed on the market in Europe must have an economic operator in Europe. So what does that mean? Well, the economic operator is the party that makes sure that the declaration of conformity is properly prepared, and they hold a copy of it. And they also have to cooperate with market surveillance authorities, and they have to be in the EU. So this is new. The other thing is that the economic operator needs to be identified and traceable on either the product packaging, the product documentation, or the literature. So what does that really mean for companies? Well, this really impacts manufacturers outside of the EU because there's already a requirement that they put their information on it. So in all cases, the manufacturer, whether they're in the EU or they're not, they already have to put this information on their product packaging. Now they also need to put the economic operator in the EU. So who can this be? Well, it can be an authorized rep in the EU. It can be like a professional marketing company can be the economic operator. But the new element that's been added in is now they've cited that if you don't have any of those other things, the fulfillment center needs to be the economic operator. So the fulfillment center are like these big warehouses where they're doing the warehousing of the products, the packaging of the products, the shipping of the products. So they will have to take on the role of the economic operator. That information will need to be placed on the packaging, and the fulfillment center will need to be able to, before they start servicing these particular products, we'll have to make sure that that DOC is properly prepared, and they have to hold a copy of it. So that's a big role for the fulfillment center if they need to do it. So in all cases, if the manufacturer is outside of the EU, there will always be two pieces of information on the product packaging or the product or the documentation. That's the manufacturer outside of the EU, and then the economic operator in the EU. Big change there. The new market surveillance regulations also specify the responsibilities for the information service provider. So for you and I, let's just call those the hosting websites. So one thing they clarified in the regulations is it's not the job of the website to make sure that the products comply. That's not part of their role. But if they're told that a product doesn't comply, it is their job to be able to pull products off and also to cooperate with market surveillance authorities. So those requirements are specified in there. Another change is that the member state market surveillance authority powers are defined and strengthened. All of market surveillance in Europe is done at the member state level. So everything is coordinated more broadly, but the member states are the ones that are responsible. And so this regulation says, you member state, you need to make sure that your market surveillance authorities have these powers. And one of them is, for example, they have to have the power to remove content from websites and remove online interfaces if necessary and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of powers that are defined in there. I just giving you one example there. There's also the creation of a new union product compliance network that's going to be led by the Commission. It's going to be coordinating market surveillance in all of Europe. So the individual member state market surveillance authorities are going to have a representative that participates in this union product compliance network. The Commission will be a part of it, and there'll be some other parties involved in it. This union product compliance network, which they're just calling the network, that part of the regulation entered into force, I think, at the beginning of this year. So they're setting that up now. And one of the interesting things about this, among many, because I'm not giving you all the detail here, is they're also being given the power to designate union test facilities. And what those are test labs in the different member states whose sole function will be market surveillance testing. It remains to be seen how this is going to be done. They're not going to be competing with the commercial sector, but they are going to be specific test labs for market surveillance. Two other changes I want to mention here. One is they are, in the new regulations, there are also efforts to improve the checks at the borders. So one of the things that they've done is they are giving the border authorities the power to hold products if certain things don't look right, and they can hold them for up to 4 days while they contact the market surveillance authorities and in the various member states, and they discuss the problems. And if the member state says, yeah, hold it, we don't want it here, they have the power to hold it more permanently and say it can't be distributed in the EU. And part of the improvements in the new regulations is also improving the electronic communications between the member states and the Border Patrol folks who are looking at this when products are coming in. And then finally, another area that they've identified some changes that are going to impact products coming in is the idea of improving the international cooperation. And there's a number of different elements related to that. So if you have more interest in this, like I said, I have a more detailed presentation, but these changes are coming and I think they're important for us to know about. So I hope you found that of interest. What's next for that new market surveillance regulation? So importantly, the Blue Guide is under revision right now. It's going to address the changes in new market surveillance regulations, but it is also going well beyond the market surveillance. There are a number of other changes that are being introduced. I don't have a draft of that yet, but as soon as I do, I can circulate it. Also, the second thing that is being revised as a result of the new market surveillance regulations is the General Product Safety Directive. And the reason for that is to respond to some issues related to new technologies and online sales, ensure better enforcement of the rules and more efficient and even market compliance, market surveillance, simplify the standardization process and improve the recall of dangerous products. So for that specific General Product Safety Directive, if you're interested in more about what that's about, I included a link and you can go right to the Commission site on that and follow that. Okay, this is reaching the conclusion of the presentation now. I just wanted to mention a couple meetings that have been taking place, and also I've included some links to some interesting presentations. The first is the ENISA Cybersecurity Workshop. ENISA is the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, and in anticipation of the activation of the essential requirements for cybersecurity, they dedicated one full day or one full session of their cybersecurity workshop specifically to cybersecurity and the Radio Equipment Directive. They also presented their overarching view of cybersecurity in Europe and also potential development of certification schemes. So all the presentations are linked in that link, and you're welcome to take a look at them. In particular, if you're involved in the notified body activities, recommend going through the presentations for the radio equipment directive. Next, I do serve as the chair of the APEC Tel Conformity Assessment and MRA Task Force meeting. We had our last meeting in February. We had 16 APEC telecom regulators participating. The online format is really enabling many, many more economies to participate. We had really good discussions. We had a lot of telecom regulatory updates, but importantly, this whole concept of the challenges with market surveillance for e-commerce, that was discussed a lot as well. The economies are all struggling a little bit with how to do this, and looking a little bit to Europe for how they're doing it with these new market surveillance regulations. Also, recently we had the meeting of it's called the EUANB, but it's the European Union Association for the Notified Bodies for the EMC Directive. That was a one-day meeting, very, very informative. There were European Commission updates, Standards Development Organization updates, and we participate in that, but actually we're just an observer. All of the notified bodies for the EMC directive, which we have 15 here in the US, they were able to participate. So again, that online formatting is enabling our companies to participate more than they have in the past. In the past, I've attended the meeting in Europe and we've had maybe one attend. So this is really good and very informative meeting. Then we had the MIC, MRA International Workshop. MIC is with Japan, and all the presentations are linked here. There's some really good ones, including one from Holger Benche, who's the chair of the Radio Equipment Directive Compliance Association, also one from Germany on market surveillance, with a lot of good German market surveillance information on radio devices, but also more broad market surveillance data, also some technical presentations that you may have interest with. On the last day of this, there was a closed session for the MIC approved registered certification bodies. I think we have 9 in the US now, so we actually weren't allowed to attend that, but our RCBs did. And we're seeing more and more of this, where the economy regulators are starting to understand more and more the importance of having meetings with the certification bodies all over the world that are doing work for their economy. So that's also good. And then also, again, the e-commerce market surveillance topic came up again. So it's really something that's coming up in all the different forums. And finally, upcoming meetings. We have the TCP Council Workshop. I'm sure George will talk about it a little bit later, coming up in April, and I've included the agenda there. There's going to be a lot of good discussion and topics. And then the Radio Equipment Directive Compliance Association meeting is coming up May 18th and 19th. And that will also include a closed session. One of those days is a closed session where only the notified bodies attend. And again, NIST won't be able to attend that, but hopefully we'll get the information. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that wasn't too much of a data dump, but thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them, or we can do them later if I've run out of time. So thank you so much.
Hey, Ramona, this is Scott. I have one question for you regarding the new UK designated standards. Are those, I know you mentioned that, the list may be more expansive. Are they going to be referencing the British standards version of some of the normal EN standards, or can you give any insight into that?
Let me see if I can go right to the link. We can look right here. I think I could do that, right? Check this out here. This is the latest. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here's the list for radio, and this is the one that came out in January. So here's the beginning of the list, right? And then you can see mostly these are EN versions right now. So for our area, it's going to be mostly EN, but one thing to point out, if you go here, sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place, but if you go back here to this one, designated standards, here's where they're explaining what these are going to be. And notice that they've included BSI as one of the organizations for which they may cite designated standards in the future. It may not impact radio equipment, but it may impact others. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like they're going to do a mix. It could be EN,
Yeah.
could be BSI, could be
Yeah.
ETSI, could be a whole mix of different things.
Yeah, Senelec, and ETSI, we would normally expect, because those are the ESOs in Europe, but this BSI wasn't typically, designated as one of those before. But now, yeah, because now it's just the UK, it's including them as well. This is broadly for all of the different regulations, and so If you're looking specifically for the radio or the EMC, then just go to those specific lists that they've identified.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Ramona, I had a question about it. They talked about they're stepping up the market surveillance. Is there anything that prompted that? Is there a lot of non-compliance issues, or what prompted them to do this effort for market surveillance?
Yeah, so there's a lot of good background sort of on the reasons for doing it this way, but in part it was to bring the market surveillance requirements into the modern world, and especially to focus on e-commerce, because now there's just direct business to consumer exchanges happening so often, and it's becoming more and more of a challenge to verify that products meet the requirements. And definitely for products coming outside of the EU, there is a lot of non-compliance. There are no central registries for a lot of the products being placed on the market in the EU. So there's not even a full knowledge of what kinds of products are being placed on the market. There is a lot of misunderstanding about what the declaration of conformity requirements are and how you prepare a declaration of conformity, what harmonized standards are. Just a lot of misunderstanding. So they want to strengthen it. They want to make sure that they get these products stopped at the borders if they can, and prevent online products from being sold directly in the EU that don't comply. So a lot of it is just modernization of the requirements. And yeah, a lot of products don't comply. There's a lot of market surveillance data available on the ADCO websites. Typically though, the ADCOs, they focus on areas of known non-compliance. So it can be misleading when you read the reports. But generally, yeah, they want to make sure products are safe and consumers are safe, products comply. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. You can buy anything online anyway today and get it from anywhere in the world. So I suppose without too much problem, without going through too many regulations.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things I thought, the way they defined the scope of the regulation, right? Because when you look at a website, how can you say, well, that website is targeting European consumers? Because essentially they're saying any website that targets European consumers is fair game for the market surveillance authorities. And their answer is, well, if, for example, it has the German language, then it's marketing to German people, right? So one of it is just if a website appears in any way to be marketing to European folks through the language, through any of the information on it, then it's fair game for market surveillance authorities. And again, they are going to be able to have the authority to pull down websites, things like that. Oh,
yeah. Before you go, not a question, just a statement for the group. I'll echo this again later, but I want to emphasize a couple things in Ramona's presentation because it's really critical. We all kind of work together, your membership and us and federal agencies, to make sure that the way we do conformity assessment in the US is going to work around the world. And so I really want to focus on us working together as these requirements come down the road. It's going to be important to the CABs to be smart enough to be able to do the work, and for the accreditors to be smart enough to know if the CABs are smart enough, and for us to be smart enough to know if the ABs are smart enough to know if the CABs are smart enough. And I think that's a whole lot of smartness that has to happen. And it's kind of coming in a little sideways in the sense that the requirements for this are being driven outside the United States at the moment. One of the things that we are very fortunate to have at NIST is access to our information technology laboratory. So when you look at these things like cybersecurity, we have the ability to talk to some of the world's experts about that. And we want to make sure that we do this in a considered way. And so we will definitely value the connection to your membership in ACIL to make sure that we're all communicating effectively, and would welcome input as these things go forward to make sure that everybody's perspective on this is being considered. And then the last thing, just as you can see from the presentation, Ramona is a fantastic source of information on this. She does a great job of keeping up with what's going on around the world. That's part of staying smart about all this stuff. And so please reach out to her if you have questions. And she and her team do a great job of being responsive to customer needs, but also trying to communicate out as these things are coming. And I know that for all of you in the lab and certification business, the fire hose of information that's coming at you is flowing faster than ever. But some of these things, it's really important for us to emphasize. We all got to get it right. It's really important to U.S. industry that the confidence that you all have developed in the conformity assessment results from the U.S. Continues to be at the high level that it is, and we want to make sure that we are staying ahead of these things. So it's an opportunity for us to continue to work together between your members and us. And I just want to really reemphasize how important that is. Thanks.
Thank you, Warren.
Thanks for the comments, Warren. That was fantastic. And thank you, Ramona.
Thank you.
Always awesome information. We appreciate all the email updates we get from you. We always pass those on to our members throughout the year. And we'll maybe because everything was so jam-packed, we'll try to see if we can get you in for a mid-year update maybe along the way, so we can spread this out a little better, so we won't be so jammed in trying to absorb it all at the same time. But fantastic information, and we always appreciate your participation and providing us updates.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.